الردة وأقسامها المجمع عليها, apostasy and its divisions that are agreed upon. فيتبين لك مما ذكرنا أن المذاهب الأربعة متفقة على هذا التقسيم. And so it has become clear for you that the four schools are in agreement to this categorization. أي تقسيم الكفر إلى أنواعه الثلاثة, meaning the categorization of blasphemy into its three categories. Al-kufr al-qawli, verbalized blasphemy, wal-kufr al-fi'li, enacted or performed blasphemy, wal-kufr al-i'tiqadi, and blasphemy of conviction. وعلى هذا التقسيم كان مفتي ولاية بيروت الأسبق. And an advocate for this categorization was the prior mufti of Beirut, الشيخ عبد الباسط الفاخوري, Sheikh Abdul Basit al-Fakhuri. فإنه يقول في كتابه الكفاية لذوي العناية. Indeed, he says in his book Al-Kifaya لذوي العناية في أحكام الردة, in the rules of apostasy, والعياذ بالله تعالى, and refuge with God is sought from that. ما نصه, quote, وهي قطع مكلف مختار الإسلام. It is for an accountable one who acts with volition to interrupt Islam. ولو امرأة, even if that were a woman. بنية كفر أو فعل مكفر أو قول مكفر, even if that were a woman, by an intention of blasphemy or an action that makes one a blasphemer or a statement that makes one a blasphemer. سواء قاله استهزاء أو اعتقادا أو عنادا, whether one said that out of sacrilege or out of conviction or out of obstinacy. انتهى, unquote. وكذلك جاء هذا التقسيم في كتب تعليم الواجبات الدينية. And likewise, this categorization came in the books of teaching religious obligations. الصادرة من مكتب التوجيه والإرشاد باليمن. Those books that were issued by the publishing house called التوجيه والإرشاد in اليمن. ألفها وطلع عليها 100 شيخ من الأزهر واليمني. These books were contributions and reviews of 100 sheikhs from Al-Azhar in Al-Yemen. ففيها ما نصه, therein, quote, الردة هي الكفر بعد الإيمان. Apostasy is blasphemy after faith. بقول أو فعل أو اعتقاد, by a statement or an action or a conviction. وقد سبق بيان ذلك في الكتاب الأول, and the clarification of that has already been mentioned in the first book, the Book of Faith. انتهى, unquote. وساق أسماء المشايخ الذين راجعوا الكتاب, and then the names of the sheikhs who reviewed the book were listed. وكل نوع من هذه الأنواع الثلاثة يخرج من الإسلام بمفرده. And every one of these three types of blasphemy take one out of Islam individually, independently. ولو لم ينضم إليه النوع الآخر, even if the other type or another type of blasphemy were not coupled with the first type. Yani one type alone is enough without being coupled with another type. فيحصل بالاعتقاد المكفر. So therefore, blasphemy occurs by a conviction that makes one a blasphemer. لو لم يصحبه قول أو فعل, even if it were not accompanied with a statement or an action. ففي الفتاوى المهدية, in the book الفتاوى المهدية للشيخ محمد العباسي الحنفي, by Sheikh Muhammad al-Abbasi, the Hanafi, ما نصه, quote, سئل في رجل لم تجري على لسانه كلمة. There was a question about a man. There was no word that ran on his tongue. A man, no word ran on his tongue. There was a question about a man whom not a single word ran on his tongue. لكنه اعتقد بقلبه ما يكفر. However, he did believe in his heart that which makes one a blasphemer. هل يكون كافرا? Would he be in this case a blasphemer? وإن لم يتلفظ, although he didn't pronounce anything. أو يتوقف كفره على اجتماع القول والاعتقاد بالقول. Or is his blasphemy dependent upon the merger of the statement and the conviction? Would his conviction alone be enough, or has to be accompanied with a statement? So here, su'ila, I said, there was a question. So it looks like it's saying, he was asked. So then goes back to someone being asked. And then here, that one being asked. Ajaba, he answered, لا يتوقف كفره على اجتماع القول مع الاعتقاد في القلب. His blasphemy is not dependent upon merging the saying with a conviction in the heart. بل إذا اعتقد بقلبه ما يكفر. Rather, if he believed in his heart that which renders one a blasphemer, يكون كافرا, then he would be a blasphemer. كما أنه لو جرى على لسانه كلمة الكفر, just like had there run on his tongue a word of blasphemy, فإنه يحكم بكفره ظاهرا. Indeed, his blasphemy would be verified. It would be judged. يعني, it would be verified, ظاهرا, outwardly. Meaning that's sufficient. We're going to deem him as a kafir. Someone was recently asking me about this guy who calls himself Abu Taymiyyah, and then he said a statement about calling on the Prophet ﷺ after his death being worse than fornicating with one's own mother, incest with one's own mother, or something like that. You probably know that statement. A statement that looks like it was made just for controversy, for clickbait. Those things need to be ignored a lot so that you don't increase the views of those videos. So, firstly, his question was if it was blasphemy. It wasn't clear for him if it was blasphemy. I told him it's blasphemy. He said, why it's blasphemy? I told him because it's disrespecting the religion. So then, he accepted. He paused for a moment and then he accepted. So then he wanted to ask me, but what about if he believes such and such, or he doesn't believe, or something, or he doesn't know, or... So my answer for him was, go by what appeared there. Just stop there. Let him ask his own question about if he believed something or didn't believe something, if he knew something, he didn't know something, if he understood something, he didn't understand something. Don't ask about some hypothetical for someone else's sake. What was it that appeared from him? He disrespected the religion openly and outwardly, didn't he? Yes? Okay, خلاص. فإنه يحكم بكفره ظاهرا. His blasphemy will be verified outwardly. That's sufficient for us. We're going to say he's a kafir. We don't have to ask and wonder and suppose. فَفِي الدُّرِّ وَحَوَاشِيهِ مِنَ الرِّدَّةِ أَنَّ رُكْنَ الرِّدَّةِ إِجْرَاءُ كَلِمَةِ الْكُفْرِ عَلَى لِسَانِهِ. It is documented in Ad-Durr and in its commentaries that the integral of apostasy is to make the word of blasphemy run on one's tongue. Yani, for one to utter the word of blasphemy on his tongue. He's saying, it's mentioned there, this. Yani, that by itself is much less than what we have learned to be blasphemy. So here's a statement that this statement is less than what we have learned to be blasphemy. It's not encompassing. He says here, in the book Ad-Durr and in its commentaries, it's mentioned that the integral of apostasy is to make the word of blasphemy run over the tongue. So that's it. He says, وَهَذَا بِالنِّسْبَةِ إِلَى الظَّاهِرِ. This is concerning what appears. الَّذِي يَحْكُمُ بِهِ الْحَاكِمُ. That by which the judge judges. Now here by judge he means the official judge or ruler. But that doesn't exclude non-official judges like ourselves. It's the same thing. We're going to do like the judge as far as judging him, but we don't have any official capacity to give any verdict, a legal verdict. So it means just like the judge, when that blasphemy appears from the person openly, apparently, outwardly, then that's enough for us. Just like for the judge, it would be enough for him. وَإِلَّا فَقَدْ تَكُونُ بِدُونِهِ. Otherwise, apostasy could happen by something else. It's not restricted to this. Or it could happen by something less than that, yani, as if he's saying, it could happen by something that's not apparent. We're talking now about something that appeared for us. It could happen by something that's not apparent. كَمَا لَوْ عَرَضَ لَهُ اعْتِقَادٌ بَاطِلٌ. Like had he taken on a false conviction, meaning one that's definitely blasphemy. Or أو نوى أن يكفر بعد حين. Or if he intended to, yani decided to blaspheme in the future. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. And Allah, exalted is He, knows best. انتهى. ولا يشترط للوقوع في الكفر انشراح الصدر. And acceptance in the heart is not a condition for falling into blasphemy. بالإجماع, by consensus. So here Shaykh is repeating himself. So he says, فقد قال ملا علي القاري في شرحه على الفقه الأكبر للإمام أبي حنيفة. Mula al-Qari said in his explanation of Al-Fiqh al-Akbar by Imam Abu Hanifa, ما نصه, quote, ففي حاوي الفتاوى. In the book حاوي الفتاوى, it is documented, من كفر باللسان, whoever blasphemed by the tongue, وَقَلْبُهُ مُطْمَئِنٌ بِالْإِيمَانِ, while his heart is tranquil with faith. He has no wavering in his faith as far as his heart is concerned. And merely it was his tongue that pronounced the blasphemy. فَهُوَ كَافِرٌ, then he would be a blasphemer. وَلَيْسَ بِمُؤْمِنٍ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ, and he would not be a believer to Allah. انتهى. End quote. وَهُوَ مَعْلُومٌ مِنْ مَفْهُومِ قَوْلِهِ تَعَالَى, and this is known from what is understood from what God said. Exalted is He. مَنْ كَفَرَ بِاللَّهِ مِنْ بَعْدِ إِيمَانِهِ إِلَّا مَنْ أُكْرِهَ وَقَلْبُهُ مُطْمَئِنٌ بِالْإِيمَانِ ولكن من شرح بالكفر صدرا فعليهم غضب فَعَلَيْهِمْ غَضَبٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ. This 106th verse of Surah An-Nahl. Whoever disbelieves in Allah after his faith, he commits blasphemy. إِلَّا مَنْ أُكْرِهَ وَقَلْبُهُ مُطْمَئِنٌ بِالْإِيمَانِ. Except anyone who was compelled while his heart was tranquil with faith. He doesn't blaspheme. وَلَكِنْ مَنْ شَرَحَ بِالْكُفْرِ صَدْرًا. However, anyone who made his chest receptive to blasphemy, then he blasphemed. فَعَلَيْهِمْ غَضَبٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ. He deserves the punishment of Allah Ta'ala. So Sheikh says, Sheikh here is mentioning what's understood from this ayah. And what's understood from this ayah is what we said last time. What's understood from it is whoever utters blasphemy, whoever merely utters blasphemy without being forced to do so, then he blasphemes by merely uttering the blasphemy. Because, like Sheikh told us, the one who does not blaspheme for merely uttering blasphemy is the one who was compelled to do so while his heart was tranquil with faith. So I think that's clear. If you have any question, go ahead and ask. قال الحافظ ابن حجر. Hafiz ibn Hajar said, ما نصه, quote, قلت, I say, that's Ibn Hajar, وممن جنح إلى بعض هذا البحث الطبري في تهذيبه. Amongst those who discussed this topic was a Tabari. He's a mujtahid from the Salaf. In his Tahdhib, فقال بعد أن سرد أحاديث الباب, he said after listing the hadiths on the topic, يعني أحاديث الخوارج, he means hadiths about the Khawarij. So what did Mujtahid Imam al-Tabari say? فيه الرد على قول من قال لا يخرج أحد من الإسلام من أهل القبلة بعد استحقاقه حكمه إلا بقصد الخروج منه عالما. He said, therein is refutation of whoever said that no one goes out of Islam from the people of the Qibla. People of the Qibla means those who are attributed to Islam, those who are thought to be Muslims. Yani, they show themselves to be Muslims. They say, yani, so therein is refutation of those who say no one goes out of Islam from the people of the Qibla after deservingly being judged with Islam, after rightfully, correctly, deservingly being judged with Islam, unless he intended to go out of Islam knowingly. So At-Tabari says there's evidence against this. So as we can see, that's an old claim. The mujtahid from the Salaf refuted that. He says, فَإِنَّهُ مُبْطِلٌ لِقَوْلِهِ فِي الْحَدِيثِ, because that saying debunks what the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So if it's debunking what the Prophet said, it has to be false. That saying debunks the hadith, يَقُولُونَ الْحَقِّ وَيَقْرَؤُونَ الْقُرْآنَ وَيَمْرُقُونَ مِنَ الْإِسْلَامِ وَلَا يَتَعَلَّقُونَ مِنْهُ بِشَيْءٍ. They say the truth, believing that they're Muslims. And they recite the Quran, believing that they're Muslims, outwardly displaying Islam. وَيَمْرُقُونَ مِنَ الْإِسْلَامِ, and they go out of Islam, they commit apostasy. وَلَا يَتَعَلَّقُونَ مِنْهُ بِشَيْءٍ, and nothing of them sticks to it. Or it means, and nothing of it sticks to them. Possibly could mean like that. But it looks like it's saying nothing, they don't stick to it. And they don't stick to it. That's what it looks like saying. ومن المعلوم أنهم لم يرتكبوا استحلال دماء المسلمين وأموالهم إلا بخطأ منهم. And it is known that they did not commit legalizing the blood of Muslims and their monies, the monies of Muslims, but by a mistake on their part. فيما تأولوه من آي القرآن, a mistake whose source is their misinterpretation of verses of the Quran. على غير المراد منه, يعني they took verses of the Quran by other than what was intended by them. So they arrived at a mistake of legalizing the blood of Muslims by a misinterpretation. He's saying they still committed kufr though. Tabari is saying they still committed kufr though. ثم أخرج بسند صحيح عن ابن عباس وذكر عنده الخوارج. Then Ibn Hajar says, Al-Tabari produced an authentic narration, an authentic chain from Ibn Abbas when the Khawarij were mentioned in his presence. وَمَا يُلْقُونَ عِنْدَ قِرَاءَةِ الْقُرْآنِ, I'm not sure what's the harakat there. فقال يعني, and so Ibn Abbas said, يُؤْمِنُونَ بِمُحْكَمِهِ وَيَهْلِكُونَ عِنْدَ مُتَشَابِهِ. Could be يلقون, لقي يلقى, يلقون عند قراءة القرآن. Then he produced an authentic chain from Ibn Abbas, and the Khawarij were mentioned in his presence. The Khawarij and يعني, if it were لقي يلقى, then ما يلقون, what they encounter when they recite the Quran, but I'm not sure what's there. So we can ask the harakat there. So Ibn Abbas said, they believe in what's clear, but they perish. And they believe in what's explicit, the muhkam, yani. They don't breach the muhkam verses. وَيَهْلِكُونَ عِنْدَ مُتَشَابِهِ. But they perish when they encounter the ambiguous verses. But ambiguous verses here means those that are relevant to them. Khawarij didn't make the same mistake as the Wahhabis, for example. The same exact mistake. They made the same mistake in the way which is misinterpreting what is mutashabih. That's the perspective, that's the similarity between them, but it's a different subject. So when we say mutashabih verses of the Quran, that's not limited to the verses of attributes that some people misunderstand their meanings because they could be explained in more than one way. Also included in the mutashabih are some verses that people of deviant beliefs have misinterpreted because they could be taken in more than one way, but they're not about the attributes. That includes verses in the Quran that mention the major sinners. And what's intended by the major sinners is the blasphemers in particular, not major sinners who are believers. So these people, by misinterpreting these verses, thought that major sinner here includes believers. ثم قال ما نصه, and then Ibn Hajar said, quote, وفيه أن من المسلمين من يخرج من الدين من غير أن يقصد الخروج منه. And therein is documentation that some Muslims go out of the religion without intending to go out of it. So we're still talking about something documented from the time of the Salaf, from a mujtahid. وَمِنْ غَيْرِ أَنْ يَخْتَارَ دِينًا عَلَى دِينِ الْإِسْلَامِ, and without that one choosing another religion besides Islam. Shaykh says, وَكَذَلِكَ لَا يُشْتَرَطُ عَدَمُ الْغَضَبِ, and likewise, the lack of anger is not a condition. فَمَنْ تَلَفَّظَ بِلَفْظِ الْكُفْرِ غَاضِبًا عَمِيدًا, so anyone who pronounced a pronunciation of blasphemy angrily and deliberately, a بغير سبق لسان, meaning without a slip of the tongue, kafar, then he blasphemed. قال النووي في روضة الطالبين ما نصه, and Nawawi said in روضة الطالبين, quote, وَلَوْ غَضِبَ عَلَى وَلَدِهِ أَوْ غُلَامِهِ, had someone been angry, furious with his child or slave boy, فَضَرَبَهُ ضَرْبًا شَدِيدًا, and then he beat him severely. فَقَالَ لَهُ رَجُلٌ أَلَسْتَ مُسْلِمًا, and then a man said to him, are you not a Muslim? فَقَالَ لَا مُتَعَمِّدًا, and then he said intentionally, no. كَفَرْ, he blasphemed. انتهى, end quote. ومعنى قوله متعمدا أي بغير سبق لسان. And when he said متعمدا, intentionally or deliberately, it means without a slip of the tongue. وفي الفتاوى الهندية ما نصه, and in the Indian verdicts, الفتاوى الهندية, the Indian verdicts, ما نصه, quote, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لِرَجُلٍ أَلَا تَخْشَى اللَّهِ, if it were said to a man, don't you fear God? فَقَالَ فِي حَالَةِ الْغَضَبِ لَا, and then he said while angry, no. يَصِيرُ كَافِرًا, he would become a blasphemer. كَذَا فِي فَتَاوَى قَاضِي خَان, and that's also like what's in the verdicts of Qadi Khan. Intaha. These are Hanafi books we're talking about here. So he said, no, I don't fear God here. Angrily, he committed blasphemy. What's the angle of blasphemy here? Appears for me that he has sacrilege. He has sacrilege here. Because, what's the rule? Rule is, if someone says a statement that can have more than one meaning, then you don't judge him as a kafir unless you know that he meant the blasphemous meaning. So here, this statement here, this example here, he said while angry when someone asked him, don't you fear God? And so he angrily said, no. It says here he'd become a kafir. Someone might ask, but what if he was saying, it's my sin that's less than blasphemy, that's my lack of fearing God. My sin that's less than blasphemy is my lack of fearing God. So someone might say, what if he meant that? When someone asked him, don't you fear God? And so he said no. So would we still call him a blasphemer just because he said no? So this is where the examples that the Shaykh gave us in Mukhtasar come in handy. Didn't the Shaykh say, what if someone said, prayer is not suitable for me? And he meant to belittle the religion, though, with the intention of belittling the religion. His statement was, prayer is not good for me. Or what if someone said, if Allah gave me paradise, I would not enter it? What if someone said, I won't do that even if it's sunnah? These examples Shaykh gave us. In all those cases, he said, when one intends, he said those statements intending sacrilege. And Shaykh says in the Bughya that these types of statements usually are blasphemy. What's meant by them usually is blasphemy. But the lesson that the Shaykh taught us there is that even these pay attention to the ability to take them another way. That's why he gave the qualifying statement. When they are said with the intention of sacrilege. So this statement here looks like those. Someone was asked, don't you fear God? And then he said, no. He blasphemed. Here it doesn't give the qualification like Shaykh gave. But he taught us like this. He taught us cases that you'd think they were just clear blasphemy, but really if you could find a way to explain them as not blasphemy. So for sure, when that person said la here, in this example, with sacrilege because he was angry, then for sure that's blasphemy. So be careful here. Yani, take the lesson here about being able to find the alternate interpretation of a statement, if there is one. Knowing when a statement does not have an alternative interpretation and when it might have. This issue here is lacking in many people, so that they would hear a statement in their own language and they wouldn't be sure, is it clear blasphemy or it's not? So one might think it's clear blasphemy when it could have another way. Or one might think maybe it has another way when it's clear blasphemy. That's why the scholars said it's not permissible to give answers to uttered statements without knowing the language in which the statement was uttered, even if that's slang language. Even if that's slang language. So someone might ask me a question, someone might translate for me and say, someone asked this question and someone said such and such in Urdu. When I translate, it comes out like this. Is it kufr? So I'm not going to say, yeah, it's kufr, even if the translation is kufr, because I don't know, how was that said in the original language? How can that statement be taken? Is it possible to take that statement in some different ways? And then this person has just presented to me some translation. So I can't answer the question. وهذا فيه الرد على ما ذكره سيد سابق في كتابه الذي سماه فقه السنة. And so this has refutation of what Sayyid Sabiq mentioned in his book that he called Fiqh al-Sunnah. وَنَصُّهُ, his quote therein is, إِنَّ الْمُسْلِمَ لَا يُعْتَبَرُ خَارِجًا عَنِ الْإِسْلَامِ. The Muslim would not be deemed outside of Islam. وَلَا يُحْكَمُ عَلَيْهِ بِالرِّدَّةِ. And he would not be judged with apostasy إِلَّا إِذَا انشَرَحَ صَدْرُهُ بِالْكُفْرِ. Unless his chest was receptive to the blasphemy. وَطُمَأَنَّ قَلْبُهُ بِهِ. And his heart was settled with it. وَدَخَلَ فِيهِ بِالْفِعْلِ. And then he entered into the blasphemy actually. Yani he entered into another religion actually. لِقَوْلِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. He said, yani, he wanted to use an ayah from the Quran to prove his wrong judgment. وَلَكِنْ مَنْ شَرَحَ بِالْكُفْرِ صَدْرًا. Whoever his heart was receptive to the blasphemy, then they deserve the torture of Allah. So like we said, he just took a piece of the ayah that has nothing to do with what he's talking about. He took a piece of the ayah that exonerates the coerced person, and he applied that to a person who merely said blasphemy without being coerced. That's Sayyid Sabiq. Intaha. End quote. لأن الآية هي في المكره. Shaykh goes on to say what we just now said. Because this verse is about the compelled one. ليست عامة له ولغيره. This ayah is not general for the compelled person and someone else too. فالله تعالى أفهمنا بهذه الآية حكمين في المكره. And so Allah, exalted is He, made us understand by this verse two judgments concerning the compelled person. أولهما أن المكره على الكفر إن كان قلبه مطمئنا بالإيمان. The first of those two is that had the person who was compelled to blaspheme, had his heart been firm with faith, وَلَمْ يَنْشَرِحْ صَدْرُهُ بِالْكُفْرِ, and his chest was not receptive to blasphemy, أَنَّهُ مَعْذُورٌ, he would be excused. لَا يُحْكَمُ عَلَيْهِ بِالْكُفْرِ, he would not be judged with blasphemy. وَالثَّانِي أَنَّ الْمُكْرَهَ إِذَا شَرَحَ صَدْرَهُ بِالْكُفْرِ. The second judgment is that the coerced person, when his heart, when he made his chest receptive to blasphemy, حُكِمَ عَلَيْهِ بِالْكُفْرِ, he would be judged with blasphemy. فَخَالَفَ هَذَا سَيِّد سَابِقٌ وَتَبِعَهُ حَسَنْ قَاطُرْجِي اللُّبْنَانِي. So Sayyid Sabiq, he went against this. And Hassan Qaturji followed him, the Lebanese man. فقال, they both said, لا يحكم على من يقول كلمات الردة بالكفر إلا أن يختار على دين الإسلام دينا غيره. Unless, they said, he would not be judged with blasphemy, the one who says the words of blasphemy. They both said, whoever said words of apostasy would not be judged with blasphemy unless he chose over Islam another religion. وَيَشْرَحُ صَدْرَهُ بِهِ, and he makes his chest receptive to it. وَيَعْتَقِدُهُ, and he believes in it. That's what they said. فَهُمَا بِذَلِكَ عَطَّلَا حُكْمَ هَذِهِ الْآيَةِ. Those two, by this claim, by this verdict of theirs, they have dismantled the judgment of this verse. وَخَرَجَا عَنْ إِجْمَاعِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ, and they have both departed the consensus of the Muslims.